My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and on the day I was supposed to marry the man I thought I loved, I stood frozen in a side hallway wearing my wedding dress, listening to my entire future crack apart. My father, the man who taught me what real strength looks like, had no seat at the head table. Instead, 9 people from my fiancé's elite family lounged at table 1, front and center, while my parents had been banished to table 15, shoved against the kitchen doors next to a rolling trash bin and a stack of dirty linens. What I overheard next shattered every illusion I'd held for 2 years. I made a decision in that hallway that I will never apologize for. Today, I'm telling you the full, raw story. The insult, the betrayal, the choice, and the aftermath that no one saw coming. If you've ever watched someone look down on your parents, your roots, or where you came from, this one's for you. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read them all. Smash that like button if you believe family is never up for negotiation, and subscribe for more real stories that matter. Let's rewind. I grew up in Willow Creek, a quiet town of roughly 9,000 in western Pennsylvania. Our home was a simple 3-bedroom ranch on Maple Street that my dad, Tom Brooks, bought right before I was born. He spent 37 years as a master electrician. Same worn tool belt, same steel-toed boots he kept repairing himself. Bad shoulders, worse knees. But he never called in sick if it meant his family had what they needed. Every night he'd wash the dust and sweat off his hands and sit at our tiny kitchen table asking about my day. My mom, Sarah, worked in the school cafeteria at Willow Creek Elementary. She knew every child by name, remembered their favorite foods, and quietly gave extra portions to the ones who showed up hungry. We didn't have luxuries. I wore hand-me-down jackets and shared a bedroom wall with the noisy furnace. But love, stability, and pride filled every corner of that house. That foundation helped me earn scholarships, finish nursing school, become a physician assistant, and pay off my loans by 27. Everything I built started with Tom and Sarah Brooks. Then I met Brandon Harrington. It happened on a rainy afternoon in October. His father came into the clinic for a follow-up, and The law office was clean and quiet. Dark wood paneling, diplomas on the wall, a receptionist who spoke in a low voice like she was always aware someone nearby was grieving. The attorney's name was Gerald Marsh, gray at the temples, careful eyes, the kind of man who's delivered enough news in his life, good and bad, that nothing much shows on his face anymore. We filed into the conference room. Bree sat next to her husband. Dale took the chair closest to the head of the table. My aunt arranged herself like she was posing for something. My mother sat straight-backed, hands folded, expression perfectly composed. I sat at the end. Gerald Marsh opened his folder and began reading. Dale received the lake house and just under $1 million in cash. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they expected more, but won't say so in public. My aunt received the downtown condo and a substantial sum. My mother received a payout and a parcel of land she'd had her eye on for years. Bree and her husband received cash, plus a portion of Grandpa's investment accounts. They'd come with a folder of their own. They were already prepared for what came next. Then Gerald Marsh turned to the last page, to Sarah Marie Calloway. Every head in that room turned toward me at the same moment. One sealed envelope, to be opened only by the named recipient in private or at the time of reading. He slid it across the table. Old paper, soft edges, my name in my grandfather's block print handwriting. I broke the seal, unfolded the single sheet inside. A phone number, 10 digits, and below it, in that same steady hand, call me when you're ready. T.C. 3 seconds of silence. Then Bree laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that takes over your whole body. She grabbed her husband's arm, trying to steady herself. My Uncle Dale shook his head slowly. My mother looked away, but I could see her shoulders moving. Even a couple of cousins across the table couldn't hold it together. Gerald Marsh did not laugh. He closed his folder, folded his hands, and watched me the way you watch someone standing at a crossroads, wondering which way they'll go. I folded the paper carefully, put it back in the envelope, and held it in my lap while the room finished laughing around me. I didn't cry. I didn't explain myself. I just sat there and made a decision that nobody in that room saw coming. I was going to make that call. Drop your location and the time you're reading this in the comments. I genuinely want to know where in the world you are right now. And if this story is hitting close to home, hit subscribe, because what happens next changes everything. Section 2. The phone call that changed everything. The parking lot outside Gerald Marsh's law office was too bright for how I was feeling inside. One of those sharp autumn afternoons where the sun is out, but there's no warmth in it, just light. Cold, flat, indifferent light bouncing off windshields and concrete, while I stood next to my 7-year-old Honda and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could hear the family wrapping up. Voices overlapping, chairs scraping, the particular energy of people who just received good news and can't wait to start spending it in their heads. Bree was probably already texting someone. Dale was probably already making calls. My mother was probably already mentally redecorating the land parcel she'd just inherited. And I was standing in a parking lot, holding an envelope that the entire room had just laughed at. I looked down at the paper in my hand, my grandfather's handwriting. Steady, clean block letters, the same way he labeled every shelf in his garage and every folder in his filing cabinet. The man was precise about everything he cared about. That's what people who knew him understood. Thomas Calloway did not do anything accidentally. which meant this envelope was not an accident, which meant the phone number was not a joke. I got in my car, closed the door, and locked it. The sound of the family faded. Through the windshield, I could see Dale climbing into his truck, already on the phone. Bree and her husband walked out together, heads bent toward each other, talking fast. My mother came out last, scanned the lot, spotted my car, and walked over. She tapped on the passenger window. I rolled it down halfway. "You see what happened in there?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion she'd already reached. "He knew you weren't ready for real responsibility, Sarah. That number is probably some kind of financial counseling service for people who need help managing basic things." She said it gently, the way people say things when they want you to believe they're being kind while they're actually being brutal. "Call it. Get whatever help he set up for you. It's okay to need guidance." She adjusted the strap on her purse and walked away before I could respond. 30 seconds later, Dale appeared on the other side of my car. He didn't knock. He just put one hand flat on the roof and leaned down so I had to look up at him through the window. "Listen carefully," he said. "If whatever's in that envelope touches anything related to the company, that runs through me. I've been vice president for 11 years. That operation doesn't move without my sign-off." He tapped the roof twice, slow and deliberate. "We understand each other?" I said nothing. He walked away. My phone buzzed. Family group chat, the one I'd been muted on for 3 months. Bree had posted, "Quick update for everyone. Sarah got an envelope. Just a phone number inside. Grandpa's little farewell gift to her." 3 laughing emojis from a cousin I barely speak to. A heart react from my mother. A shrug emoji from someone I didn't even recognize in the thread. I put my phone face down on the passenger seat, looked at the envelope, picked up my phone again, and dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was already preparing myself for voicemail, already rehearsing whether I'd leave a message or just hang up and pretend this never happened. Then someone answered. The voice was calm, not rushed, not surprised, just calm, the way people sound when they've been expecting something for a long time and it's finally arrived. "Hello," the man said. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. "Who is this?" "My name is Walter Briggs. Your grandfather appointed me as his private trustee 20 years ago. I've been waiting for this call, Miss Calloway. But we can't talk about the details over the phone. I need you to come to my office in Columbus, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Bring your driver's license, your birth certificate, and your Social Security card." I stared through the windshield. A pigeon landed on Dale's truck hood and just sat there like it owned the place. "I don't understand," I said. "A trust? What kind of trust?" "The kind your family doesn't know exists," Walter said. "And the kind that doesn't pass through probate, doesn't go through the will, and cannot be challenged by anyone who was just in that conference room." The silence that followed was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. Before I could find words, Walter continued. "Your grandfather left me specific instructions about this call. He asked me to tell you one thing if you actually dialed this number. He said, and I'm reading this directly from his letter now, the ones who show up when there's nothing in it for them are the only ones worth trusting with everything." My throat closed up. "He also built in a condition," Walter added. "If you never called this number, if the envelope was thrown away, ignored, or dismissed, the trust would transfer in full to a charitable foundation, permanently. No appeals, no second chances. Harold, your grandfather, wanted to know that whoever received this would come forward on their own, without pressure, without anyone pushing them toward it. So if I'd thrown it away, I said slowly, everything would have gone to charity, Walter confirmed. Your family would have kept only what was in the will, nothing more. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. The vinyl was cool against my skin. Outside, the parking lot was emptying out, the last of the family cars pulling away, one by one. I'll be there at 10, I said. Good, Walter said. And Miss Calloway? Yes? Your grandfather spent 20 years making sure the right person would pick up that phone. You just proved he was right about you. I want to stop here for a second because I know some of you are reading this and feeling something specific right now. That feeling of being the one everyone wrote off, the one who didn't fit the mold, the one whose name got said with a pause before it at family dinners. If that's you, keep reading, because this next part matters. I drove home on autopilot, 40 minutes on a route I know so well my hands could do it without me. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept replaying the Thanksgiving from 2 years ago, the one where my grandfather's entire family sat around his dining table, doing that annual thing my mother started, where everyone shares their biggest win from the year. It sounds nice in theory. In practice, it was a ranking system dressed up as a tradition. Bree went first. Closed a new investment round for her company. The table applauded. Her husband smiled like he'd won something too. Dale talked about a new development project, used the phrase strategic positioning at least 3 times, and looked around the table after each one to make sure people were tracking his importance. My aunt talked about a charity board she'd joined, which everyone treated like a professional achievement. Then it got to me. My mother cleared her throat. "And Sarah?" she said, with that pause, that specific pause she'd perfected over years of practice. Sarah is still managing the furniture shop. She tilted her head slightly. In Holden. Not growing a company, not building something, managing a shop. In Holden. The way she said the town's name made it sound like a place where ambitions went to retire. Polite laughter around the table. Not mean laughter, just the kind that tells you exactly where you rank. From the far end of the table, my grandfather set down his fork. The table quieted, the way it always did when he decided to speak. "Sarah runs that entire operation solo," he said. "Inventory, staff scheduling, vendor accounts, customer relations. She's been doing it for 4 years, and that store has turned a profit every single quarter under her management." He looked around the table. "That's not nothing. That's called being capable." My mother waved a hand. "Dad, nobody's saying she isn't capable. We just think she could aim a little higher." Thomas Calloway said nothing else. He picked his fork back up and finished his meal. But later that night, after dinner, after Dale's 3rd scotch, after Bree left early, I found my grandfather in his garage. He was sitting on his old wooden stool, running his thumb along a piece of reclaimed oak he'd been saving for a project he never quite started. He looked up when I walked in, patted the stool next to him. "Don't let them shrink you," he said quietly. "The people who dismiss what you do are usually the ones who couldn't do it themselves. I've watched how you handle things, Sarah. I've been watching for a long time." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with him until the garage got cold and we went inside. I never asked what he meant by that. I wish I had. That night, back in my apartment above the dry cleaner on Birch Street, I laid out my documents on the kitchen table. Driver's license, birth certificate, social security card. I set my alarm for 6:30 and sat across from that envelope like it was another person in the room. Call me when you're ready. TC. My phone buzzed again. Bree, in the family chat. Just spoke to my attorney. Any trust Grandpa established can potentially be contested if we demonstrate cognitive decline. He was 79 with a documented health history. We have options. Dale replied within 2 minutes. Agreed. The company belongs to this family collectively. We'll pursue every avenue. I read both messages twice. Then I set my phone face down, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into Walter Briggs' office and find out exactly what my grandfather had spent 20 years building for me in secret. And whatever came next, I was going to face it the same way I always had, by showing up. Have you ever had someone believe in you more than you believed in yourself? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because Section 3 is where this story gets complicated in ways nobody saw coming. There is a specific kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in good manners. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't make a scene. It pours expensive wine into crystal glasses and says things like, "We're just being honest," or "We only want what's best for you," while it takes everything it can carry and calls it inheritance. That's the kind of evening I walked into when my mother organized what she called a memorial dinner at my grandfather's house the night after the will reading. The Calloway family way of grieving, apparently, was to open the good wine, sit in the dead man's chairs, and start dividing up the future before the week was out. I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment for a long time after my call with Walter Briggs, turning the idea over. Every reasonable part of my brain said, stay home, eat something simple, go to bed early, and protect your energy for tomorrow morning when things would actually matter. But another part of me, the part that has always needed to see things clearly rather than imagine them, said, go, watch, listen, know exactly what you're dealing with. So I went. My grandfather's house on the edge of Granville had always felt alive when he was in it. The kind of house that smells like wood shavings and coffee and something cooking on the stove. A house that had projects in every corner and tools hung on pegboards in the garage, and a front porch where you could sit for an hour without needing to say anything at all. That night, it felt like a stage set. Same furniture, same rooms, but the energy was completely different. The house felt like something that had already been claimed, already mentally redistributed, already stripped of the man who made it mean something. Dale had taken the chair at the head of the dining table, my grandfather's chair. He didn't pause before sitting down, didn't hesitate for even a second, just walked in, pulled it out, and sat like he'd been waiting years for that specific moment. Maybe he had. Sarah is still managing the furniture shop. She tilted her head slightly. In Holden. Not growing a company, not building something, managing a shop. In Holden. The way she said the town's name made it sound like a place where ambitions went to retire. Polite laughter around the table. Not mean laughter, just the kind that tells you exactly where you rank. From the far end of the table, my grandfather set down his fork. The table quieted the way it always did when he decided to speak. Sarah runs that entire operation solo, he said. Inventory, staff scheduling, vendor accounts, customer relations. She's been doing it for 4 years, and that store has turned a profit every single quarter under her management. He looked around the table. That's not nothing. That's called being capable. My mother waved a hand. Dad, nobody's saying she isn't capable. We just think she could aim a little higher. Thomas Calloway said nothing else. He picked his fork back up and finished his meal. But later that night, after dinner, after Dale's third scotch, after Bree left early, I found my grandfather in his garage. He was sitting on his old wooden stool, running his thumb along a piece of reclaimed oak he'd been saving for a project he never quite started. He looked up when I walked in, patted the stool next to him. "Don't let them shrink you," he said quietly. "The people who dismiss what you do are usually the ones who couldn't do it themselves. I've watched how you handle things, Sarah. I've been watching for a long time." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with him until the garage got cold and we went inside. I never asked what he meant by that. I wish I had. That night, back in my apartment above the dry cleaner on Birch Street, I laid out my documents on the kitchen table: driver's license, birth certificate, social security card. I set my alarm for 6:30 and sat across from that envelope like it was another person in the room. "Call me when you're ready. TC." My phone buzzed again. Bree, in the family chat. "Just spoke to my attorney. Any trust Grandpa established can potentially be contested if we demonstrate cognitive decline. He was 79 with a documented health history. We have options." Dale replied within 2 minutes. "Agreed. The company belongs to this family collectively. We'll pursue every avenue." I read both messages twice. Then I set my phone face down, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, I was going to walk into Walter Briggs' office and find out exactly what my grandfather had spent 20 years building for me in secret. And whatever came next, I was going to face it the same way I always had: by showing up. Have you ever had someone believe in you more than you believed in yourself? Tell me about it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because Section 3 is where this story gets complicated in ways nobody saw coming. There is a specific kind of cruelty that comes wrapped in good manners. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't make a scene. It pours expensive wine into crystal glasses and says things like, "We're just being honest," or "We only want what's best for you," while it takes everything it can carry and calls it inheritance. That's the kind of evening I walked into when my mother organized what she called a memorial dinner at my grandfather's house the night after the will reading. The Calloway family way of grieving, apparently, was to open the good wine, sit in the dead man's chairs, and start dividing up the future before the week was out. I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment for a long time after my call with Walter Briggs, turning the idea over. Every reasonable part of my brain said, "Stay home, eat something simple, go to bed early, and protect your energy for tomorrow morning when things would actually matter." But another part of me, the part that has always needed to see things clearly rather than imagine them, said, "Go. Watch. Listen. Know exactly what you're dealing with." So I went. My grandfather's house on the edge of Granville had always felt alive when he was in it. The kind of house that smells like wood shavings and coffee and something cooking on the stove. A house that had projects in every corner and tools hung on pegboards in the garage, and a front porch where you could sit for an hour without needing to say anything at all. That night, it felt like a stage set. Same furniture, same rooms, but the energy was completely different. The house felt like something that had already been claimed, already mentally redistributed, already stripped of the man who made it mean something. Dale had taken the chair at the head of the dining table, my grandfather's chair. He didn't pause before sitting down, didn't hesitate for even a second, just walked in, pulled it out, and sat like he'd been waiting years for that specific moment. Maybe he had. My aunts had already moved through the living room with opinions about what should stay and what should go. My mother was in the kitchen, directing things with the quiet authority she uses when she wants everyone to know she's in charge without technically saying so. Bree and her husband Marcus sat at the table with matching expressions of barely contained impatience, like people waiting for a meeting to start so they can get to the part where they talk. I came in through the side door and sat at the far end of the table. Nobody moved to greet me. Bree glanced over once, the way you glance at something that doesn't require a response, and went back to her phone. Marcus gave me a nod that was more of a formality than a welcome. Dale didn't look up at all. My mother came out of the kitchen, saw me, and smiled. That specific smile she has that lives only on the surface of her face and never travels any further inward. "Sarah," she said, "you made it. Good." The dinner was everything I expected and worse. Dale opened by talking about the company like he'd already been given the keys. He used phrases like, "going forward," and "the direction I'm planning," and "when I take over operations," as casually as someone talking about weekend plans. Nobody at the table challenged a single word. My aunt nodded along. My mother listened with an expression of satisfied agreement. Even Bree, who I know is sharp enough to spot a power grab when she sees one, stayed quiet because Dale's version of events benefited the overall family position and therefore, by extension, benefited her. That's how family politics work sometimes. You don't have to agree with someone's methods as long as their success lifts your boat too. Dale poured himself more of my grandfather's wine and leaned back in my grandfather's chair and said, "Dad would have wanted someone who understood the business to keep it running, someone who's been in the room for the decisions that mattered." He looked around the table. "Continuity is everything in real estate. You can't just hand something like this to someone who doesn't have the foundation." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. My mother waited approximately 4 minutes before she turned to me with that bright, particular expression she reserves for moments when she wants to make something hurt but needs plausible deniability about her intentions. "Sarah," she said, "I hope you're not still upset about the envelope." She tilted her head. "I think your grandfather did what he thought was kind. He knew you weren't in a position for real financial responsibility, so he made sure you'd have access to some guidance. That's actually thoughtful when you think about it." Bree smiled into her wine glass. "Some of that guidance might even be helpful," my mother continued. "There's no shame in needing a starting point." Dale looked up then, tapped the table once. "For the record, if anything in that envelope is connected to the company in any legal way, that conversation happens through me and through our attorneys." He said it the way people say things they've already decided, not as a discussion, but as a declaration. I cut a piece of bread and put it on my plate. I didn't say a word. Here's what none of them knew as they sat around that table, confidently narrating my grandfather's intentions. Irrevocable trusts do not expire when the person who created them passes away. They do not fold into the estate. They do not become available for reallocation just because someone with a title and a leather chair decides they should. An irrevocable trust, established by a mentally competent adult with proper legal documentation, is one of the most protected instruments in estate law. I knew this because Walter Briggs had spent 20 minutes explaining it to me 4 hours earlier in a parking lot while I was still shaking. Dale had apparently spent 0 minutes learning any of it, which is a significant oversight for someone who'd spent 11 years working alongside one of Central Ohio's most successful real estate operators and who was currently declaring himself the heir apparent to that operation. But I sat there and ate my dinner. I passed the rolls when someone asked. I topped off my water glass. I listened to Dale outline his plans for a company he did not own and watched my cousin sketch out how her inheritance would fund the next phase of her startup, and observed my mother accept compliments about the food she hadn't actually cooked. And I said nothing. Because there is a time to speak and a time to watch. And I had learned, from years of being underestimated by these exact people, that the most powerful thing you can sometimes do is let someone finish building a plan on a foundation that doesn't belong to them. My grandfather's sister, Aunt Roberta, was the only other person at that table who didn't seem to be performing anything. She's 71, mostly retired, lives 40 minutes outside Columbus with 3 cats and a garden she takes more seriously than most people take their careers. She and my grandfather were close in the way siblings get close again after they've both lived enough life to stop competing with each other. She sat across from me and watched the room with the quiet, unhurried attention of someone who has seen enough family dinners to know exactly what kind this one was. At one point, while Dale was explaining his restructuring vision for Callaway Group's development pipeline, Roberta looked directly at me across the table. She didn't say anything. She just looked. And then she gave me the smallest nod I've ever seen. Less than a movement, really, more like a decision she was communicating without words. I don't know exactly what she knew, but I think she knew something. The dinner broke up gradually the way these things do. Dale shook hands with himself, essentially, wrapping up his own monologue about the future. Bree and Marcus left first, already halfway into the next conversation before they hit the door. My aunt went to find something she had apparently decided she was taking home from the living room. My mother started gathering dishes with the efficiency of a woman ready to be done with an obligation. I washed my plate at the sink, dried it, put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Dale caught me on the way out, came up behind me in the hallway and put a hand briefly on my shoulder, the way people do when they want physical contact to do the work of authority. "Chin up," he said. "You got something today, even if it wasn't what you hoped for. Some people walk away from these things with nothing at all." He paused. "But if that envelope turns into anything involving the company, you call me first, before you talk to anyone else. Understood?" He walked back toward the dining room before I could respond. I stood in the hallway for a moment, my hand on the front door, looking back at the house. At the dining room where someone else was sitting in my grandfather's chair. At the living room where someone was evaluating his belongings. At the kitchen where my mother was organizing his dishes. All of it happening so fast, like the man himself had barely had time to become the past before everyone started treating him like one. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The drive back to Holden was quiet. Dark fields on both sides of the highway, the occasional light from a farmhouse set back from the road. I had both hands on the wheel and the gas receipt with Walter's address folded in my jacket pocket, and one clear thought running through my mind on a loop. They think they already know how this ends. They thought they knew at Thanksgiving 2 years ago when my mother summarized my life in one sentence, and the table laughed quietly into their napkins. They thought they knew in that conference room when the envelope slid across the table and everyone's face shifted from anticipation to amusement. They thought they knew tonight, around that dinner table while they carved up a future they hadn't been given. People who have never been surprised by someone they underestimated tend to keep underestimating. It's a pattern. And patterns, once you recognize them, lose most of their power over you. I got home just after 9. Set my documents out on the kitchen table again. License, birth certificate, social security card, all lined up and ready. Set my alarm. Made tea I didn't drink. Sat with the envelope one more time. Call me when you're ready. T.C. I already called, Grandpa. Now I just had to show up. If you've ever sat at a table where people talked about you like you weren't there, or planned around you like you didn't count, I want to hear from you in the comments. You're not as alone in that feeling as you think. Subscribe if you want Section 4, because tomorrow morning, everything Sarah thought she understood about her grandfather gets 10 times bigger. Section 4. The Truth Behind the Trust. There is something quietly terrifying about walking into a room where someone has been keeping a secret on your behalf for 20 years. Not a bad secret, not the kind that unravels things, the kind that was held carefully, intentionally. The way you carry something fragile across a long distance and don't set it down until you reach the right pair of hands. That's what Walter Briggs's office felt like when I walked in at 9:58 on a Thursday morning with my documents in a manila folder and my heart doing something irregular in my chest. The building was on East Broad Street in Columbus. Limestone exterior, older construction. The kind of address that doesn't need to announce itself because the work it does speaks for itself. No glass tower, no revolving door with a logo etched into it, just a brass nameplate beside a wooden door and a receptionist inside who looked up when I entered and said, "Miss Calloway," without me having to introduce myself. That small thing, being expected, being known before you speak, hit me harder than I anticipated. I followed her down a short hallway lined with framed documents and into an office that felt like it had been organized by someone who genuinely respected order. Law books arranged by subject, a mahogany desk cleared of everything except what was currently relevant, 2 leather chairs across from it, and on the wall behind the desk, a single framed photograph. 2 men standing in front of a structure mid-construction. Concrete foundation, steel framing beginning to rise behind them. One man was my grandfather, maybe 50 years old, younger than I'd ever seen him in photos, wearing a hard hat and grinning like someone had just told him the best news of his life. The other man was thinner, younger, holding a rolled set of blueprints under one arm. "That was 1993, said a voice behind me. Walter Briggs was in his late 60s, silver-haired, measured in his movements, the kind of man who has spent decades in rooms where precision matters, and it shows in how he carries himself. He extended a hand and shook mine with the firm, unhurried grip of someone who means what they do. "First project your grandfather and I ever worked on together," he said, nodding toward the photograph. "He built it. I handled the legal framework. We worked together from that day until the day he passed." He gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit down." He opened a leather binder and laid the documents across the desk in a specific order, deliberate, unhurried, the way someone moves when they've been waiting a long time for a moment and want to do it properly. "In 2005, he began, "your grandfather Thomas Calloway established an irrevocable trust. I am the appointed trustee. This trust exists entirely outside of his will. It does not pass through probate. It is not subject to the estate process. It cannot be contested by any beneficiary named in the will, regardless of what arguments they bring or what attorneys they hire." He looked up at me to make sure I was following. I was following. "The trust holds 100% ownership of Calloway Group, LLC. That includes the operating company, all active development projects, the long-term commercial investment accounts, the land holdings across 4 counties, and the reserve capital set aside for future acquisitions. He paused. Current estimated value as of last quarter is approximately $41 million. The number entered the room and just sat there. I didn't reach for it, didn't react to it. Something in me understood that reacting to a number before you understand what it means is exactly the kind of thing that gets people into trouble. My grandfather had taught me that without ever saying it directly. He'd shown me, in the way he talked about his early years, how many people had chased the size of something without respecting the weight of it and ended up crushed underneath. So I just let the number exist and kept listening. "Why me?" I asked. "I want you to answer that honestly, not kindly." "Because I manage a furniture store. I don't have a business degree. I've never run a company with 60 employees and multi-county operations. There are people in my family who have spent years working inside that business. Give me the real answer." Walter Briggs took his glasses off and set them on the desk. "Your grandfather gave me a letter when he established this trust in 2005, he said. I've read it many times over the years, waiting for this conversation. He told me, the person I want holding what I built is not the one who learned to talk about business. It's the one who showed up when I needed someone to show up, before they knew there was anything in it for them." He slid a single page across the desk toward me. He also asked me to share this specific memory with you when we met. In the winter of 2009, your grandfather had a minor stroke. Left side weakness, speech difficulties, a recovery that required months of daily work. He said that his daughter suggested a nursing service. His son-in-law talked about facilities. His other grandchildren sent cards. And you, he paused, you were 19 years old. You dropped your semester at Ohio State. You drove to his house every single morning for 4 months, and you did the work. The physical therapy exercises, the medication management, the slow walks around the property he hated and you made him do anyway. You read him the newspaper when his eyes were tired. You stayed. I looked down at the desk. He said you never once mentioned what it cost you, Walter continued. You never brought up the scholarship you lost, or the semester that didn't get finished, or the friends who moved on without you. You just showed up every day and did what needed doing. And when he recovered, you went back to your life without asking for anything in return. I hadn't thought about that winter in a long time. I'd filed it away in the category of things I'd done that didn't seem to lead anywhere. Evidence that showing up for people didn't necessarily mean they'd show up for you. My mother had certainly never mentioned it as a point in my favor. The family had never referenced it as anything other than the period when Sarah didn't finish her degree. But my grandfather had been keeping a different record entirely. Walter slid a signature page across the desk. You have 30 days to accept or decline the transfer, he said. If you accept, full ownership of the trust transfers to you immediately, and I remain available as legal counsel through the transition. If you decline, the trust transfers permanently to a charitable foundation Thomas selected. He was specific that there would be no third option, no negotiation, no modified arrangement. Accept or decline. There is also a personal letter from your grandfather, he added, sealed. It can only be opened after you sign. I looked at the signature line. My pen was in my hand before I consciously decided to pick it up. But I stopped. I need a few days, I said. Walter nodded immediately, like he'd expected exactly that. Like the fact that I hadn't signed on the spot was itself the right answer. That's what Thomas, said you'd say, he told me. He said, she won't sign right away. She'll want to think about it. That's how I know she's the right one. Before I left, Walter turned his laptop toward me and made a call. A woman appeared on the screen. Late 50s, silver hair cut short and practical, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The kind of face that has made 1,000 decisions and is ready to make 1,000 more. Behind her, I could see an open-plan office, people at desks, a whiteboard covered in project timelines and color-coded markers. Sarah, Walter said, this is Caroline Marsh. She's been the acting CEO of Callaway Group for the past 3 years, since your grandfather's health began declining. Caroline looked at me through the camera the way a contractor looks at a new site, assessing. Not unkind, but not warm either. Professional in the way that people are when they've learned that warmth without substance wastes everyone's time. So you're the one, she said. I guess so. I'm not interested in your credentials, she said directly. I've worked with enough people who had the right degrees and the wrong instincts to know that a diploma doesn't tell me what I need to know. I have one question for you. I waited. Are you honest? I think so, I said. I try to be. She studied me for a moment. Thomas said the same thing about you. Not that you were brilliant, or strategic, or visionary. He said you were honest, and you worked hard, and you didn't quit on people. In my experience, that combination is rarer than any MBA. She leaned forward slightly. If you take this, I'll stay on for 12 months. I'll walk you through every project, every relationship, every decision point that matters. I'll introduce you to the team, the contractors, the partners. After 12 months, it's yours to run. But I need to know you're serious before I invest that time. I'm serious, I said. She nodded once. Then we'll talk again after you sign. The call ended. I sat in the chair for another few minutes after the screen went dark, looking at the photograph on the wall. 2 men at the beginning of something, one of them building the structure, one of them building the framework that would protect it. 20 years later, here I was. Walter walked me to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and handed me a sealed envelope, smaller than the one from the will reading, with my name on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. This one's different from the other, he said. Thomas gave it to me 15 years ago and asked me to hold it until this day. I held it carefully, didn't open it. One more thing, Walter said. Your cousin has already contacted 2 attorneys about contesting the trust. I want you to understand clearly that they have no legal pathway to do so. This trust was established when your grandfather was 58 years old, in full health, with complete mental capacity, and has been maintained and reviewed by independent legal counsel every 3 years since. Any challenge will be expensive for them and entirely unsuccessful. He said it without satisfaction, just as information. I nodded. Your family may make a great deal of noise about this, he added. That's their right. But noise is not the same as power. I drove back toward Holden on the same highway I'd taken in. Same flat fields, same pale sky, same route I'd driven 100 times. But everything looked slightly different, the way things look after something shifts inside you that you can't fully name yet. My phone rang twice on the drive, Dale both times. I let it go to voicemail. It rang a third time, my mother, voicemail. A text from Bree. We need to talk about Grandpa's company. Call me when you can. I put the phone in the cup holder face down and kept driving. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark, with Holden's water tower visible on the horizon, I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the sealed envelope from my grandfather. the one he'd written 15 years ago and asked Walter to hold until today. I hadn't opened it yet. I was waiting until I got home, until I was in my own space, in the quiet, without anyone else's noise in the room. Because whatever my grandfather had written in that letter, he'd written it for me. Not for my mother to interpret, not for Dale to weigh in on, not for Bree to screenshot and share in a group chat. For me. And I was going to read it the way he meant for me to read it. Alone and ready. The letter is in section 5, and I'll warn you now, it might be the part of this story that stays with you the longest. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and tell me in the comments, has someone ever believed in you from a distance, quietly, without making a show of it? Because that might be the most powerful thing one person can do for another. The woman who shows up. I drove back from Columbus in silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat like a living thing. When I pulled into my apartment parking spot, my phone was already blowing up. Family chat, missed calls from Dale, a voicemail from my mother saying we needed to talk about what's fair. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked upstairs, laid the letter on my kitchen table, and sat across from it the way I used to sit across from my grandfather in his garage. I thought about the girl who dropped out of college, the one who managed a small-town furniture store and still turned a profit every quarter, the one everyone had already written off. That girl was gone. In her place was the woman who showed up. I picked up my phone and texted the family group chat for the first time in months. Meeting at Grandpa's house tomorrow at 10 a.m. All of you. We need to talk. Then I turned my phone off, made a cup of bad coffee, and opened the folder Walter had given me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the footnote. I was the story.